What if humanity was never meant to be the weakest species in the galaxy, but the most feared? What if the chaos we were born into, the storms, the wars, the endless struggle to survive on a hostile planet, wasn't a curse, but a blueprint? In a universe ruled by order and logic, one force defies every prediction: the human instinct to adapt. Welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Love and War Story, where we dive into the untold chronicles of Deathworlders. Where love collides with battle. Where war is strategy. And survival is poetry. These are not just stories. They're warnings. They're questions. Could you endure what they did? Would you fight or evolve? Let us take you beyond the edge of stars, where Earthborn warriors don't just survive, they rise. Now, are you ready to see what the galaxy fears most? The Galactic Academy floated like a silent cathedral in orbit over the emerald skies of Virelia Prime, its towers shimmering with refracted starlight, built from metals that hummed with harmonic resonance. This was not merely a school, it was a sanctuary of order, intellect, and tradition. A place where the most gifted cadets from thousands of civilizations were molded into instruments of diplomacy and defense. Each corridor was lined with crystal data conduits and bioluminescent vines that pulsed softly with information. Here, war was not emotion, it was mathematics. Strategy, not instinct. Elegance, not chaos. And then, the humans arrived. Their ship didn't gleam. It rumbled. The hull bore scratches not from design, but from wear. The landing gear hissed like an animal warning others to stay away. And when the ramp lowered, 5 figures emerged, not in formation, not in sync, but each one moving with a presence that rippled through the polished air of the landing bay. No insignias. No ceremony. Just 5 sets of eyes scanning the room as if they expected it to betray them. Elias Gray stepped first, tall, expression unreadable. Beside him, Mari Tran adjusted the strap of her pack with deliberate tension, her gaze never still. Dax Holt cracked his neck slowly as he looked around, the kind of man who calculated threat before he smiled. Lila Voss, silent, almost too still, walked as though she already knew every escape route in the room. And Joan Mbeki brought up the rear, his steps heavy, as if grounded more deeply in gravity than the others. The ambient hum of the academy dimmed as they passed. Species with translucent skin and psychic currents pulled their cloaks tighter. Others turned away, eyes blinking in defensive patterns. Some simply stared, wide-eyed and frozen. The term echoed like a curse down the polished corridors, Deathworlders. It wasn't a nickname. It was a classification. Earth, Sol 3, was a death world. A planet of shifting tectonics, poisonous flora, apex predators, unstable climates, and diseases that mutated faster than cures could be made. Life on Earth wasn't lived. It was earned. Every breath, every step, carved from danger and chaos. No species in the Council had expected Earth to reach space. When they did, no one expected them to last. And when they did that too, sending 5 of their best to the Academy, whispers turned into warnings. The 5 humans were not welcomed. They were tolerated. Observed. Measured. In lectures, they struggled. The logic matrices used by interspecies commanders did not account for human irrationality. The humans failed tests not because they didn't understand, but because they refused to accept the given parameters. They questioned axioms. Disregarded sacred texts. They replaced theory with pattern recognition and gut instinct. In social halls, they sat apart not by choice, but by gravity. Others avoided them, like planets steering clear of unstable stars. And yet, their presence pulled eyes like magnets. Their movements, no matter how quiet, created ripples. Some instructors called them crude. Others called them dangerous. But none could deny that in simulations, they never broke. Outnumbered, they adapted. Cornered, they misled. Disarmed, they improvised. They didn't win by playing the game. They won by reshaping it. Rumors began to spread of a secret mission. A hidden purpose behind their arrival. Some believed Earth had demanded their entry to prove worthiness for council inclusion. Others whispered that the humans were a test sent not to learn, but to challenge. What was certain was this: they had one chance. Succeed, and humanity might be welcomed, feared, but accepted into the galactic fold. Fail, and Earth would be labeled as a threat. A pariah. Watched forever. Never trusted. In the upper halls of the Academy, behind layers of quantum locks and psychic seals, the decision was made. The humans would face a final trial. One no other cadet had ever survived. The siege of Calderum. But that was still days away. For now, they walked the shining corridors of the Academy in silence, every footstep echoing the ancient rhythm of something older than protocol. Survival. And they were very, very good at surviving. The halls of the Galactic Academy shimmered with equations carved in crystal and logic encoded in light. Every corridor whispered of precision. Every classroom was a temple of theory. For species born among the stars, war was no longer chaos. It was calculation. Geometry of violence. Philosophy of containment. Predictable. Controllable. Clean. And then came the humans. They stumbled through quantum field equations. They misread ancient tactical simulations written in spectral glyphs. They interrupted lecturers with questions that were too simple or too direct. Their minds didn't bend in neat angles. They weren't raised in harmony with gravity fields or taught to see war as balance. They saw it as survival. They weren't slow or stupid, only strange. In the theory chambers, they lagged behind. But in the field, they became something else entirely. During training exercises, while others waited for orders, the humans moved first. When simulations rewarded diplomacy, they adapted the language of body and tone instead of protocol. When weapons failed, they built new ones from scraps. They didn't ask permission. They asked, "What works?" Jonah Mbeki used his boots to reroute ground sensors by kicking up metal shavings. Lila Voss disabled a drone not with a command code, but by hurling a stone precisely into its optic hinge. Mari Tran led a mock squad through a hostile zone using only sound clicks, knocks, throat vibrations. Elias Gray never shouted, never signaled, he simply moved, and the others followed like water finding its course. The other cadets watched from a distance. Sometimes with curiosity. Mostly with unease. Primitive, they whispered. Instinctual. Unrefined. But deep down, they felt something colder than judgment, fear. And so, the Academy decided. They would issue a challenge. A final measure. A public test. The Siege of Calderum. A simulation once created to train the finest minds of the Council's armed forces. A fortress designed by sentient architects. Its walls moved like thoughts. Its defenses rewrote themselves every minute. Its AI was older than some species. The simulation had never been conquered. Not once. Not in over a century. It was, in essence, unwinnable. When the announcement came, the amphitheater filled with flickering holograms and murmurs in a dozen tongues. Most cadets leaned forward with interest. Others chuckled. "They'll last 6 minutes," hissed a cadet from Veldoc, his mandibles clacking. "They won't even make it past the gate," sang another with photosynthetic skin that rippled with amusement. The humans? They said nothing. That night, while others meditated or debated formations, the humans vanished into the lower levels of the Academy. No simulations. No practice drills. Just long walks in silence. Scraps of paper. Dusty vents. Forgotten maintenance tunnels. They weren't reviewing the siege layout. They were studying the structure beneath the structure. Elias drew lines in the dirt with a stick he'd snapped off a cleaning drone. Dax tested air ducts for sound. Mari measured her body against narrow shafts. Jonah filled a flask with the Academy's water to test its effect on insulation gel. Voss broke down the AI protocols not by hacking, but by watching it fail during past simulations. She counted the seconds between resets. They didn't prepare to win. They prepared to become something the simulation couldn't understand. They didn't learn the rules. They learned how to make the rules irrelevant. Their strategy was not born in logic, but in experience. They came from a world where rivers flooded, forests burned, predators stalked in silence. Where children learned to read wind before they could read books. Where surviving was not elegant, it was messy, brutal, real. They didn't think in lines. They thought in curves, in traps, in patterns broken and rebuilt on instinct. By the seventh day, they were ready. Not polished. Not uniform. But dangerous. And as the day of the siege drew near, a strange energy settled over the academy. Not tension. Not dread. Something older. The kind of stillness before a storm breaks across a battlefield. The simulation began with a flash of white light. A low chime echoed across the chamber. And then, the humans vanished. Not into shadows. Not behind cover. They simply disappeared. Spectators in the grand observatory gasped. Across 100 species, no one had seen anything like it. The standard launch procedure required cadets to move through the main gate, predictable, visible, controlled. But the Deathworlders ignored it. The sensors showed 5 life signatures in the starting zone one moment and nothing the next. No heat trails. No motion paths. No transponders. The fortress, an AI-driven stronghold of shifting walls and adaptive defenses, stalled for a full 2 seconds. Its logic loops hesitated, unsure whether to scan, attack, or wait. In that delay, the humans were already moving below the surface, inside the structure, in places no one had thought to watch. Jonah Mbeki crawled through an old maintenance drain, long decommissioned, half-clogged with simulation algae and artificial sludge. He smeared the grime on his skin to lower his thermal signature. Every breath was shallow, each movement calculated. He knew the sensors above could detect heartbeat variances. So he slowed his heart. Above, Maritran scaled the underside of a heat exhaust shaft. Her gloves weren't made for climbing, they were made for friction. She pressed her limbs flat, using only tension and breath to stay aloft. The shaft pulsed with bursts of simulated thermal discharge, each wave threatening to cook her alive. But she timed it. She always did. Meanwhile, Dax Holt used the storm. The simulation included irregular weather to test adaptability. As others feared the acid rain, Dax knelt in it. He coated his suit with mud, dust, and chemical runoff from the terrain's edge. It formed a crust that reflected light and dispersed heat. Invisible. Unreadable. He moved through the fog like a whisper. Lila Voss entered not through a gate, but through a water purification duct she'd mapped by memory. She moved silently, eyes flicking through thermal ghosts, rerouting signal paths using a tiny magnetic tool sewn into her sleeve. She didn't disable the system, she lied to it. She made the fortress believe she was part of its environment. And Elias Gray? He didn't sneak. He didn't hide. He walked directly into a restricted zone disguised as wreckage. He'd studied the simulation architecture and found a bug and object recognition flaw where crushed debris from prior test runs was ignored by security fields. So he built a suit from debris parts and became the bug. The AI never noticed him. Minutes passed. Still, the observers saw nothing. A dozen drones circled, searching in perfect spirals. The fortress began to adapt, activating flame corridors, flooding lower tunnels, deploying mirror fields. But every move was one step behind. The humans weren't attacking. They were infiltrating the code behind the simulation itself, physically, tactically, psychologically. 20 minutes in, simulated security reports showed breaches in 5 zones. The system responded by dividing its forces. But the breaches were fake noise created by Voss's signal interference and Mari's motion traps. The real threat had already reached the inner walls. Jonah planted a homemade pulse disruptor, a device built from spare components the other teams had discarded. It created a feedback loop inside the command hub, forcing the fortress to temporarily reboot half its targeting systems. Dax placed a line of water-soaked cloth across a hallway. Simple. Primitive. But when the auto-turrets targeted movement and fired lasers through the wet fabric, the heat warped the sensor's alignment. 35 minutes into the simulation, Elias reached the central command core. No grand battle. No explosion. He simply placed his palm on the emergency override, which had been exposed during a wall rotation he predicted 12 days ago during his personal review of the fortress's construction pattern. 2 minutes later, the fortress shut down. Simulation complete. Elapsed time, 37 minutes. A heavy silence spread through the observatory. The audience didn't cheer. They couldn't. They were stunned. In 100 years, no species, not even the hive-minded strategists of Ralkai or the adaptive swarm lords of Zyrene, had breached Calderum. And yet 5 humans had walked through it like fog. The high voice of Seltor leaned forward, his glow dim. How did they do it? He whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to the silence itself. And the silence had no answer. Because the truth was, the humans didn't follow the rules. They bent them. Twisted them. Broke them. And then, became something the galaxy hadn't seen in eons. Unpredictable. Patient. Relentless. They became the storm the fortress was never built to survive. The smoke hadn't yet cleared from the simulation grounds, but across the galaxy, something had already shifted. In a chamber of glass and light, built at the heart of the Galactic Council, ancient beings sat in silence, their minds processing what they had just witnessed. The siege of Calderum, once thought to be the impossible test, had been shattered in under 40 minutes by 5 humans, a species still labeled by many as unpredictable, unstable, and dangerous. But now, all those labels felt hollow. The council summoned the humans. They walked in slowly, not proud, not smiling, just present, with bruises still forming and grime still clinging to their skin. They didn't ask for applause. They didn't explain themselves with long speeches. Elias Gray, calm and steady, spoke only once. We evolved to survive. We adapt. We don't think in boxes. The words landed like a meteor, quiet, but world-shaking. For a moment, the entire chamber was still. No translation was needed. No explanation required. The council didn't respond with ceremony. They responded with action. Within hours, a new directive passed, a motion never before approved so quickly. A new division was born, Adaptive Tactics Command. Its purpose? To study the unconventional strategies of Deathworlders and teach their methods to elite operatives from across the galaxy. Not just for simulations, but for real wars. Real threats. Real chaos. The humans did not refuse. Nor did they gloat. They returned to training, this time, not as students, but as leaders. Aliens who had once mocked them now studied under them. Creatures with hive minds, fluid forms, crystalline nervous systems, they all tried to learn something that couldn't be taught in books: how to think like Earthlings. How to act when logic fails. How to win when losing is certain. And then came the mission. On the outer edge of the Teldrin system, a pirate stronghold had re-emerged on Petra IV, a moon wrapped in choking fog and magnetic storms that devoured satellites and made electronic targeting useless. For decades, the Council had tried to purge it. Dozens of raids had ended in disaster. Ships vanished. Squads went dark. Petra IV became a ghost moon, a place where order went to die. This time, 5 humans would lead. No parade. No fanfare. Just a coded launch and an old transport ship with thermal shielding that cracked on re-entry. The crew was silent. Inside the ship's dark hold, Mari sharpened a blade not for use, but for focus. Jonah read old terrain logs by red light. Voss adjusted atmospheric filters by hand. She didn't trust the Council's readings. Dax ran simulations in his head. And Gray, as always, just listened to the hum of the ship, to the pressure in the walls, to the rhythm of fear in the floor. They landed at night, though Petra IV had no real day. The storm had a pulse, a rhythm like breath, and they moved between it like ghosts. Other teams would have waited for scans. The humans moved blind, trusting instinct. They used the terrain, the sharp cliffs, the toxic water, the sudden heat bursts. They made the world their weapon. They didn't fight the base. They made the base fight itself. Jonah planted sonic traps that mimicked thunder, drawing patrols away. Voss rerouted sewage vents to create pressure buildups. Dax disarmed doors not by codes, but by freezing the locks with chemical reactions using local minerals. Mari disappeared into the fog, only to reappear at the heart of the pirate barracks with a smoke flare and a broken comms unit, just enough to make the enemy panic. Gray? He never fired a shot. He stood beneath the main power relay and simply waited for the moment the system looped, then crushed it with one precise strike from a salvaged maintenance rod. In 9 minutes, the fortress collapsed. The pirates, those who weren't already unconscious, surrendered without even seeing their attackers. And somewhere, back in the observation chambers of the council, someone whispered, "What kind of mind thinks like that?" There was no answer. Only silence. Because by then, the galaxy had begun to understand. Deathworlders weren't just strong. They weren't just fast. They were something else entirely. They were unpredictable. They were unbreakable. And above all, they were just getting started. The moon Petra IV did not welcome visitors. Its surface boiled with rain so acidic it could strip paint from StarCraft hulls in seconds. The air shimmered with toxins that dissolved the lining of lungs. Its skies cracked with magnetic storms that turned guidance systems into gibberish. For the Galactic Council, it was a dead world unfit for war, unfit for peace. But for the Deathworlders, it was familiar. They touched down not with ceremony, but with caution. No parades, no heavy weapons. Just 5 humans in worn exosuits, each patched and scuffed from a dozen unseen trials. They didn't speak. The world spoke first, a low, groaning wind pushing ash across the rocks like whispers from the planet's bones. They listened. The pirate base was built into the edge of a ravine, where the runoff from acid rainwater drained into a natural basin. The base's outer sensors were thought to be unbreachable. Its sentries had repelled 20 council raids. Its occupants laughed at the idea of defeat. But they hadn't planned for a team that saw obstacles as invitations. Mari Tran entered first, crawling through a collapsed maintenance shaft barely wide enough for breath. Her suit's sensors shorted within minutes, but she didn't need them. She felt the vibration of every step, every drip of rain overhead, every hum of dying machinery. She reached the core of the water filtration system and did what no soldier would have done, she reversed it. For 6 minutes, acid rain flooded backward through the base's ventilation. At the same time, Dax Holt climbed the exterior wall, naked to the sensors, his body coated in heat-dampening mud and ash gathered from the landing site. He moved like a shadow in a thunderstorm, cutting power cables with surgical precision using a broken blade. Jonah Mbeki, meanwhile, stood in the open. He walked straight into the fog, an impossible move. But the fog was what made him invisible. He carried no weapon, only a small canister of repurposed waste gas from the base's own discarded coolant lines. When the wind turned, he hurled it into the intake ducts. 10 seconds later, half the base began to choke. Voss used sound. She hacked the base's emergency broadcast system and transmitted the screams of the pirates' own fallen. On a death world, fear is not an emotion, it's a chemical. She pumped it through every corridor. And Gray stood beneath the storm, watching the lightning dance across the peaks. He waited for the hum to reach its crescendo. Then, with nothing more than a recharged signal flare, he marked the sky and called them in. Not airstrikes. Not drones. Just silence. And then, collapse. The base fell in 8 minutes and 36 seconds. No casualties on the human side. Minimal structural damage. No shots fired by traditional weapons. The pirates surrendered not because they were outgunned, but because they didn't understand what they were facing. By the time the Council's reconnaissance team arrived, it was already over. What they found was not war. It was precision. Adaptation. A message written in scorched earth and broken systems: humanity does not fight like you. humanity becomes the battlefield. When the humans returned to the Galactic Council, there were no more whispers. No more doubts. The chamber rose to greet them, not with fear, but with a kind of quiet reverence. Earth was granted full membership by unanimous vote. Not because of power, but because of possibility. In the weeks that followed, the phrase Deathworlders shifted. It no longer meant wild. It meant prepared. It no longer meant unstable. It meant unbreakable. The humans never asked for thanks. They returned to their quarters, cleaned their gear, studied the next terrain. But one message was left behind. Etched in the storm-battered walls of Petra IV, carved by Elias Gray's own hand with a knife of salvaged alloy. Sometimes the harshest worlds create the best warriors. And across the stars, those who once laughed, now listened. You've just witnessed a piece of humanity's hidden potential. But this is only the beginning. What would you have done in their place? Would you trust instinct, or obey the rules? Let us know in the comments. Because this story belongs to more than one voice. It belongs to all of us who wonder. What if Earth wasn't the mistake, but the answer? Subscribe to follow the rise of the Deathworlders. Share the story if it moved something in you. And remember, sometimes, the galaxy doesn't need perfection. It needs someone who refuses to break. See you in the next mission. And until then, stay curious. Stay human.